I typed out the message quicker than I've ever written anything in my life. Dad, come home now. Mom is trying to make me Greg's toy. Please hurry. But let's start from the beginning, right after your subscription to this channel. I stared out the window of my room, watching the perfectly manicured lawns of Greenfield roll by. Everything looked so pristine, so put together, just like my life was supposed to be. Emily, get down here now. Mom's voice cut through the quiet like a knife. I flinched, my heart racing. What had I done wrong this time? Hurrying downstairs, I found Mom in her home office, tapping away furiously at her laptop. She didn't even look up as I entered. Yes, Mom? I asked, my voice small. Your grades from last semester. Care to explain? She swiveled her screen around, revealing my transcript. My stomach dropped. I'd gotten all A's, except for one B+ in advanced calculus. I tried my best, Mom. The class was really hard and... Tried your best? She scoffed, finally meeting my eyes. Her gaze was cold, calculating. Emily, you know that's not good enough. How do you expect to get into a top law school with grades like these? I bit my lip, fighting back tears. But I don't even want to be a lawyer. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped. With my connections and your potential, you could be running your own firm by 30. You just need to apply yourself. The familiar weight of expectations settled on my shoulders. I wanted to argue, to tell her that I had my own dreams, but the words died in my throat. I'm sorry, I mumbled instead. I'll do better next time. Mom nodded curtly, already turning back to her work. See that you do. I have a meeting in 10 minutes. Make sure the house is presentable for when my associates arrive. I nodded, grateful for the dismissal. As I left her office, I caught sight of Dad in the kitchen. He gave me a sad smile, but said nothing. He never did when it came to Mom. Mechanically, I started tidying up, my mind a whirlwind of frustration and despair. This was my life, a constant struggle to meet impossible standards, to be the perfect daughter my mother wanted. But lately, something felt different. The pressure was still there, but there was something else too. Something in the way Mom looked at me, like I was a chess piece she was considering how to move. I shook my head, trying to clear the thought. I was probably just being paranoid. After all, this was my mother. She might be cold and demanding, but she wouldn't actually hurt me, right? I tried to ignore the pit in my stomach as I heard Greg's booming laugh echo from downstairs. He was here. Again. Emily, Mom's voice rang out. Come down and say hello to our guest. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Maybe if I just got it over with quickly. Plastering on a fake smile, I descended the stairs. Greg's eyes locked onto me immediately, that slimy grin spreading across his face. There she is, he exclaimed, standing up from the couch. Emily, you get more beautiful every time I see you. I felt my skin crawl as he approached, opening his arms. Before I could react, he enveloped me in a hug that lasted way too long. His cologne was overpowering. Greg, always a pleasure, I lied through gritted teeth as I extracted myself from his grip. Mom shot me a warning look. I knew what it meant. Play nice, be polite, don't make waves. Emily, why don't you grab Greg a drink? She suggested, in a tone that made it clear it wasn't really a suggestion. As I headed to the kitchen, I heard Greg's voice behind me. I'll give her a hand. My heart raced as his footsteps followed me. In the kitchen, I busied myself with glasses and ice, trying to ignore his presence. So, Emily, he drawled, leaning against the counter far too close to me. How's school going? Still acing all those classes? It's fine, I mumbled, not meeting his gaze. You know, with your smarts and my connections, we could make quite the team someday, he said, his voice low. I could feel his eyes roving over me. I'd love to mentor you, show you the ropes. I suppressed a shudder. Thanks, but I'm not really interested in business. Greg chuckled. Oh, I'm sure I could change your mind. Why don't we grab dinner sometime, just the two of us? I could tell you all about... Emily! Mom's sharp voice cut through the tension. What's taking so long with those drinks? I seized the opportunity, practically running out of the kitchen with the glasses. As I handed them out, I caught Mom's disapproving look. I knew I'd hear about my rudeness later. The rest of the evening was torture. Greg found every excuse to brush against me, to make suggestive comments just out of Mom's earshot. By the time he finally left, I felt dirty and exhausted. Mom, I said hesitantly once we were alone, I I don't feel comfortable around Greg. The way he looks at me, the things he says. Her eyes flashed with anger. You're overreacting, Emily, she snapped. Greg's important and powerful. You'll need to understand how to deal with men like him. I felt like I'd been slapped. How could she dismiss me like this? Didn't she see how creepy he was? But Mom, Enough! She cut me off. I won't hear another word about this. Greg is a valued associate, and you will treat him with respect. Do I make myself clear? I nodded numbly, fighting back tears. As I retreated to my room, I felt more alone than ever. My own mother, who I'd always thought would protect me, was throwing me to the wolves. I could barely breathe as I lay in bed, my mind racing with the events of the evening. Greg's leering face haunted me every time I closed my eyes. I kept replaying his words over and over, each syllable dripping with sinister intent. A beautiful girl like you must have big plans after college. I shuddered, pulling the covers tighter around me. But it wasn't just Greg that terrified me. It was my own mother's reaction that truly chilled me to the bone. I'd always known my mom was ambitious, often putting her career before everything else. But tonight was different. The way she looked at Greg, hanging on his every word, laughing at his awful jokes. It was like she was auditioning for his approval. And when he suggested that relaxing getaway, I swear I saw dollar signs in her eyes. I grabbed my phone, desperately wanting to text Dad. But what would I even say? Hey, Dad, Mom's trying to pimp me out to her creepy business associate? He'd never believe me. Or worse, he'd believe me and do nothing, like always. I tossed and turned, my stomach churning with anxiety. Every creak of the house made me jump, half expecting Greg to materialize in my doorway. What the hell was I supposed to do? I couldn't tell my friends. They'd never understand the world of power and manipulation I was trapped in. And my professors? They'd probably just chalk it up to rich people problems. As the night wore on, one thing became increasingly clear. I was on my own. If I wanted to escape this nightmare, I'd have to find a way out myself. But how? Where could I go? Who could I trust? I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. Blinking away the sleep from my eyes, I saw my mother, Rebecca, entering with an unnatural smile plastered across her face. Something about her expression made my skin crawl. Emily, we need to talk, she said, perching herself on the edge of my bed. Her demeanor was unsettling, and I felt my heart rate quicken. I sat up, pulling the covers closer to my chest. What about? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. A knot was already forming in my stomach. Rebecca reached out and squeezed my hand. The touch felt more like a trap than a comfort. Greg and I think it's time for you to mature, she said, her eyes boring into mine. He can help you get ahead in life, open doors. All he asks is a little cooperation. My stomach churned violently. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you serious? I managed to choke out. Rebecca's expression hardened, her fake smile disappearing in an instant. Stop being so naive. This is how the world works, Emily. If you want success, you need to make sacrifices. I recoiled, pulling my hand away from hers. Horror washed over me as the full implications of what she was saying hit me. You're asking me to... She cut me off before I could finish, her tone chilling. Refuse and I'll cut off your college funds. You'll have nothing. I stared at my mother, shock slowly morphing into disgust. This woman I'd known my whole life, who was supposed to protect me, was now threatening to throw me to the wolves. Rebecca wasn't just cold. She was dangerous. For days after that conversation, I felt like a prisoner in my own home. Avoiding Rebecca and Greg became my daily mission, but the looming threat weighed heavily on my mind. Greg's visits increased, and each time his advances became more aggressive. One afternoon, I was trying to sneak from my room to the kitchen when I heard Greg's voice downstairs. Where's that lovely daughter of yours, Rebecca? He asked, his tone making my skin crawl. Oh, she's around, my mother replied casually. You know how young girls are, always hiding away. I pressed myself against the wall, willing myself to become invisible. Well, tell her I'm looking forward to our arrangement, Greg said with a chuckle that made me want to vomit. Rebecca's pressure mounted with each passing day, her patience visibly waning. She'd corner me in hallways or burst into my room unannounced. Emily, don't you understand what an opportunity this is? she'd hiss, her eyes wild. Do you want to throw away your future? I'd shake my head, unable to form words, and she'd storm out, muttering about my ingratitude. Nights were the worst. I lay awake, haunted by what my mother was planning. My once stable world was crumbling, and no matter where I turned, there seemed no escape. Rebecca's casual mentions of Greg's next visit felt like countdowns to a disaster. Greg will be here on Friday, she'd say over dinner, as if discussing the weather. I expect you to be presentable and polite. I knew I couldn't stay silent forever, but the fear of losing everything paralyzed me. In moments of desperation, I'd pull out my phone and type out messages to my dad. Dad, something's wrong. Mom is making me do something awful. But each time fear won out, and I deleted the drafts before hitting send. Rebecca's manipulation grew more overt. She'd drop hints, reminding me that time was running out and urging me to be more cooperative. You know, Emily, she said one morning as I was getting ready for school, Greg has connections at all the top law schools. It would be a shame if those doors were to close. My self-confidence, once bright, dimmed under my mother's increasing threats. I felt trapped, cornered like an animal with nowhere to run. My only comfort was the secret recordings I had started making. Late at night, I'd hide my phone in strategic spots around the house, capturing Rebecca's sinister conversations and Greg's predatory behavior. I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with thoughts of Greg's impending visit and the weight of the evidence I'd collected. My phone felt like a ticking time bomb in my hands, filled with recordings and screenshots that could blow everything wide open. I thumbed through the texts I'd snagged from Mom's phone. My stomach churned as I read their exchange. Rebecca. Emily's being difficult. Might need to push harder. Greg. Don't worry, I can be very persuasive. Looking forward to our little arrangement. I wanted to throw up. How could my own mother do this to me? Dad was pulling another late shift at work. He'd been doing that a lot lately, trying to contribute more even though Mom's wealth made his income look like pocket change. If only he knew what was really going on. A text from Mom lit up my screen. Greg will be here tomorrow evening. Be ready. My hand shook as I replied with a non-committal, okay. I needed more time, but I was running out of options. I paced my room, trying to figure out my next move. The evidence was damning, but would it be enough? And who could I trust with it? A crazy idea hit me. What if I could get Mom to incriminate herself on video? It was risky, but it might be the final nail in the coffin. I set up my laptop, angling the webcam towards my bedroom door. With trembling fingers, I hit record and waited. It didn't take long. Mom barged in without knocking, her face a mask of irritation. Emily, we need to talk about tomorrow, she said, arms crossed. I stood my ground. I'm not doing it, Mom. I won't let Greg touch me. Her eyes narrowed. Don't be dramatic. It's just business. You do this and your future is set. My future? I laughed bitterly. You mean your future, your deals, your sick arrangement with Greg. Mom's facade cracked for a moment. You ungrateful little... She caught herself, composing her features. This is happening, Emily. End of discussion. As she turned to leave, I couldn't help but ask, Does Dad know you're cheating on him? She froze, hand on the doorknob. When she looked back, her eyes were cold. Your father is irrelevant. He's nothing but a distraction from what really matters. The door slammed behind her. I lunged for my laptop, hands shaking as I stopped the recording. There it was, the final piece of evidence I needed. The next day, the air felt heavier than usual. I had been bracing myself for Greg's visit, every bone in my body screaming that something terrible was about to happen. I stayed in my room, trying to focus on anything but the gnawing anxiety building in my gut. From downstairs, I heard the familiar low rumble of Greg's voice. Rebecca's laugh followed not long after, sharp and fake, like glass breaking into silence. My heart started pounding. Then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heading up the stairs. I immediately locked the door, my hands shaking, fumbling with the stupid little latch. I grabbed my phone, hesitating, scrolling through my texts. I couldn't take this anymore. My fingers hovered. But no, just send it, Emily, I thought. I typed out the message quicker than I've ever written anything in my life. Dad, come home now. Mom is trying to make me Greg's toy. Please hurry. I stared at it for only a second, my thumb trembling, and then I hit send. The message disappeared. No going back this time. Either Dad would come through, or I'd handle this all on my own. Minutes passed, feeling like hours. I thought I was safe for just a bit longer. Maybe they'd keep talking downstairs. Maybe they'd leave me alone. But then the voices quieted. I strained to hear. Something clattered loudly, and then another sound, softer but closer, footsteps outside my door. My heart shot into my throat. I heard the creak first, the door, the fucking door. It moved so slowly, like time was mocking me. I stumbled back toward my bed, nearly tripping over the damn chair. And then they were there. Rebecca stood just barely inside the doorway, her eyes so cold it was like staring into a void. Next to her was Greg. His disgusting grin practically dripped off his face. They were both naked, which made me sick to my stomach. I froze, everything inside me telling me to run, but my feet wouldn't move. Emily! Rebecca's voice was low, smooth, like this was just business, like this was normal. You knew this was coming, she continued, like she was talking to an assistant, not her fucking daughter. Greg didn't say a word. His disgusting eyes told me enough. He moved toward me, slow at first, as if savoring the moment. I felt bile rising in my throat. Rebecca didn't flinch. She just watched. I struggled to step back, but Greg moved faster, grabbing my wrist in a tight grip. Don't fight it, baby girl, he whispered, his breath hot and rank against my face. I yanked my hand, desperate to break free, but he just tightened his grip, pulling me closer. Rebecca stayed quiet, her arms crossed, as though she was assessing a deal at work. Mom! Nothing. Just a blank stare from her, like I wasn't even a person anymore, like she'd already handed me over. No! I screamed, smacking Greg's arm with my other hand, but it felt pointless, like beating a brick wall. Shut up! Rebecca hissed, her voice suddenly sharp, harsh. I turned to her, panic exploding inside me. How could she just stand there? He pulled harder, both hands now gripping me, forcing me toward the bed. My world was collapsing around me, and then, like a bomb exploding in the distance, I heard the front door slam open downstairs. Dad's arrival had turned everything upside down in a matter of seconds. His face was a mask of fury I'd never seen before, his eyes blazing with a protective rage that both terrified and comforted me. Get away from her, Dad roared, his fists connecting with Greg's face in a flurry of punches. I flinched at the sickening sound of knuckles meeting flesh, but a part of me felt a savage satisfaction watching Greg crumple under my father's assault. Mom tried to intervene, her perfectly manicured hands reaching out to stop Dad, but in his blind fury, he lashed out at her too. I gasped as she stumbled backward, shock painted across her face. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in my mother's eyes. As Greg lay moaning on the floor and Mom cowered against the wall, Dad turned to me. The rage in his eyes melted into concern and love so intense it made my chest ache. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Everything I'd been bottling up for weeks came pouring out in a torrent of sobs and broken words. Dad, I choked out. Mom and Greg, they were going to... I couldn't finish the sentence, but I didn't need to. Dad's face crumpled as understanding dawned. He knelt beside me, pulling me into his arms. I buried my face in his chest, inhaling the familiar scent of his aftershave mixed with motor oil. It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now. I've got you, he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and showed him the recordings. Dad's body tensed as he listened, his grip on me tightening protectively. When the last recording finished playing, he turned to Mom, his face a storm of emotions. You were going to sell our daughter? The words came out as a hoarse whisper, laden with disbelief and revulsion. Mom's eyes darted between us, her carefully constructed facade crumbling. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear in her expression. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The wail of approaching sirens cut through the tense silence. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was finally over. The nightmare that had been closing in on me for weeks was coming to an end. Dad stood up, keeping one arm protectively around my shoulders. It's okay, Emily. The police are here. You're safe now. I nodded, feeling drained but oddly light. As the sound of car doors slamming and hurried footsteps approached our front door, I looked at my mother one last time. The woman who had controlled every aspect of my life, who had been willing to sacrifice me for her own gain, now looked small and pathetic. In that moment, I realized I was finally free. I stood there, trembling, as the police sirens wailed outside our house. My dad's arm was wrapped protectively around me, his presence a shield against the chaos unfolding before us. The front door burst open, and several officers rushed in, their eyes quickly scanning the scene. "What's going on here?" one of them demanded, his hand resting on his holster. My dad spoke up, his voice rough with emotion. "This man," he pointed at Greg's crumpled form on the floor, "and my wife were trying to exploit my daughter." The officer's eyes widened, and he motioned to his colleagues. Two of them immediately moved towards Greg, who was groaning and barely conscious. "Sir, are you all right?" one officer asked my dad, noticing his bruised knuckles. Dad nodded grimly. "I'm fine. Just take care of my daughter." A female officer approached me gently. "Are you okay, sweetheart? Can you tell us what happened?" I took a shaky breath, clinging tighter to my dad. They were going to... I couldn't finish the sentence, but I didn't need to. The officer's face softened with understanding. "It's okay. You're safe now," she assured me. As the officers hauled Greg to his feet and started to cuff him, I found my voice again. "My mom, she's involved too. She planned this." The room fell silent for a moment, save for my mother's sharp intake of breath. "Emily," she hissed, her eyes flashing with anger and fear, "don't you dare—" "Arrest her," I said, my voice stronger now, despite the tears streaming down my face. I turned to the officers, desperate for them to understand. "She's just as guilty. She made this happen." The officers exchanged glances, then moved towards my mother. As they began to cuff her, she finally lost her composure. "You can't arrest me," she shrieked, her carefully maintained facade crumbling. "I'm your mother, Emily." I felt my heart breaking, but I stood my ground. "You did this for yourself," I whispered, barely able to look at her. My voice grew louder as I continued, cold and distant. "She planned this. She's been manipulating me for weeks. She deserves to be in prison just as much as him." As they led her away, my mother's mask shattered completely. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her words laced with venom. "You can't do this to me. I made you. I gave you everything." Her voice faded as they pulled her out the door, leaving behind a deafening silence. I collapsed into my dad's arms, overwhelmed by the weight of what had just happened. I stood outside the imposing courthouse, my heart pounding in my chest. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon, casting long shadows across the steps. My dad squeezed my hand reassuringly. "You ready, sweetie?" he asked, his voice gentle but firm. I took a deep breath and nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." We climbed the steps together, our footsteps echoing in the early morning quiet. The air was thick with anticipation, and I could feel the weight of what was about to unfold settling on my shoulders. As we entered the courtroom, the hushed whispers of spectators and reporters filled the air. I caught snippets of conversation, my name repeated over and over like some twisted mantra. My eyes darted around, taking in the sea of unfamiliar faces until they landed on two figures I knew all too well. Greg sat at the defendant's table, his once imposing frame now hunched and deflated. He wore an ill-fitting suit that hung off his frame, a far cry from the tailored ensembles he used to flaunt. His eyes met mine for a brief moment, and I felt a chill run down my spine, even now after everything he had the audacity to smirk. Next to him sat my mother, Rebecca. She looked smaller somehow. Her perfectly coiffed hair was limp, her makeup minimal. The sharp suit she wore seemed to swallow her whole. When she turned to look at me, I saw something I'd never seen before in her eyes. Fear. We took our seats behind the prosecutor's table. As the bailiff called the court to order, I felt my dad's hand on my back, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone. The judge, a stern-faced woman with graying hair, entered the courtroom. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and a rustle filled the air as everyone stood. As the proceedings began, I found myself transported back to those terrifying moments. The prosecutor's voice seemed to fade into the background as he laid out the charges against Greg and Rebecca. Your Honor, the state charges Gregory Thompson with attempted rape, conspiracy to commit sexual assault, and human trafficking. We also charge Rebecca Anderson with conspiracy to commit sexual assault, child endangerment, and accessory to attempted rape. The words hit me like physical blows. Hearing them spoken aloud in this formal setting made everything feel so much more real. The evidence presentation began, and I watched as the faces of the jury members contorted in disgust and horror. The recordings I had made played through the courtroom speakers, Greg's lecherous comments, and my mother's cold calculations echoing off the walls. You see, Rebecca, Greg's voice rang out, tinny and distorted, your little Emily is quite the prize. I'm sure we can come to a mutually beneficial arrangement. My mother's reply made me want to vomit. Of course, Greg. Emily knows what's expected of her. She won't disappoint us. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the memories that came flooding back. My dad's arm tightened around my shoulders, and I leaned into him, drawing strength from his presence. The prosecution called witness after witness, each one painting a damning picture of Greg and Rebecca's actions. Former employees spoke of Greg's predatory behavior, of my mother's willingness to overlook his indiscretions for the sake of business deals. When it was my turn to take the stand, I felt like I was walking to my execution. The walk to the witness box seemed to take an eternity. As I sat down, I caught sight of my mother's face. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of remorse, but it was quickly replaced by the cold, calculating look I knew so well. The prosecutor approached me, his voice gentle. Emily, can you tell the court about the events leading up to the night of April 15th? I took a deep breath, my voice shaky, as I began to speak. It started small at first, comments from Greg that made me uncomfortable, my mother insisting I be polite to him. But then, I recounted every detail, every horrifying moment. The way Greg's hands would linger too long, the way my mother would push me towards him. The threats, the manipulation, the fear that had become a constant companion. And on the night of April 15th, I continued, my voice growing stronger, they were going to... I couldn't finish the sentence, but I didn't need to. The courtroom was dead silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. The defense attorneys tried to discredit me, to paint me as a rebellious teenager making up stories. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the testimonies, the physical evidence collected from our home. It all pointed to one undeniable truth. As the trial progressed, I watched Greg's smug demeanor crumble. By the time the jury went into deliberation, he looked like a shell of the man who had once terrorized me. The wait for the verdict was excruciating. Hours stretched into what felt like days. When the jury finally filed back in, I held my breath. In the case of the state versus Gregory Thompson, on the charge of attempted rape, we find the defendant guilty. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. I felt tears streaming down my face as the rest of the verdicts were read out. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Gregory Thompson, this court sentences you to 20 years in prison without the possibility of parole. I watched as Greg was led away in handcuffs, his face ashen. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. He couldn't hurt me anymore. But it wasn't over yet. My mother's trial was next, and it was equally devastating. The prosecutor painted a picture of a woman so consumed by greed and ambition that she was willing to sacrifice her own daughter. Rebecca Anderson didn't just fail to protect her child. The prosecutor's voice rang out. She actively participated in putting her in harm's way. She conspired with a known predator, using her own daughter as a bargaining chip in her twisted games of power and control. My mother's defense was weak, her lawyers grasping at straws. They tried to paint her as a victim of circumstance manipulated by Greg, but the evidence told a different story. When the verdict came, it was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Rebecca Anderson, this court sentences you to 15 years in prison. As the gavel came down, I saw my mother's face crumple. The mask of control she had worn for so long finally shattered. As she was led away, our eyes met. In that moment, I saw something I had never seen before: regret. The courtroom began to empty, but my dad and I stayed seated, processing what had just happened. It was over. They were gone. We were safe. Emily, my dad said softly, I'm so proud of you. You were so brave. I collapsed into his arms, the emotions of the past months finally overwhelming me. We sat there for a long time, holding each other as the reality of our new future began to sink in. As we finally stood to leave, my dad cleared his throat. There's one more thing we need to do, he said. I've filed for divorce. I nodded, unsurprised. After everything that had happened, how could he stay married to her? The divorce proceedings were almost anticlimactic after the intensity of the criminal trials. My mother's empire, once seemingly invincible, crumbled in the wake of the scandal. Her businesses collapsed one by one, her reputation in tatters. In a twist of irony, my dad walked away with half of the fortune my mother had been so desperate to protect. The wealth she had been willing to sacrifice everything for, including me, was now split between them. As we left the courthouse for the final time, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, anger, hope. They all swirled together in a confusing mess. But as I looked up at my dad, I knew one thing for certain. We had survived. We were free. And whatever came next, we would face it together. I stood outside our new apartment building, my fingers nervously tracing the outline of the key in my pocket. Dad fumbled with the boxes in his arms, and I rushed to help him. Thanks, sweetie, he said, flashing me a tired smile. As we walked up the stairs, I couldn't help but think about how different everything was now. Greenfield felt like a lifetime ago, even though it had only been a few months since the trial. We reached our floor, and I unlocked the door to our new home. It was smaller than what we were used to, but it felt safer, clean, like a fresh start. Home sweet home, Dad said, setting the boxes down with a grunt. I nodded, looking around the sparse living room. Yeah, home. We spent the next few hours unpacking in relative silence. It wasn't uncomfortable, just thoughtful, both of us lost in our own worlds. As I was arranging books on a shelf, I heard Dad clear his throat. Em, you okay? I turned to face him, seeing the concern etched on his face. I don't know, Dad. It's all so different now. He came over and wrapped an arm around my shoulders. I know, sweetheart, it's been tough. I leaned into him, feeling the tears I'd been holding back start to well up. I saw Mrs. Johnson at the grocery store yesterday. She looked at me like I was some kind of freak show. Dad's arm tightened around me. People don't know how to react, Em. They'll get over it. Will they? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Or will I always be the girl whose mother tried to, I couldn't finish the sentence. Dad turned me to face him, his hands on my shoulders. Listen to me, Emily. You are not defined by what happened to you. You're strong, brave, and incredibly resilient. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. I nodded, wiping away a stray tear. Thanks, Dad. He smiled, then glanced at his watch. Hey, isn't it about time for your therapy session? I checked the time and nodded. Yeah, I should get going. As I grabbed my bag, Dad called out, Remember, we're having dinner with Dr. Patel tonight. She wants to discuss your progress. I gave him a thumbs up and headed out the door. The walk to Dr. Hansen's office was short, but it felt like running a gauntlet. Every face I passed seemed to be staring, judging. I kept my head down, trying to ignore the whispers that followed me. When I finally reached the office, I let out a sigh of relief. Dr. Hansen's assistant, a kind older woman named Martha, greeted me with a warm smile. Hello, Emily. Dr. Hansen will be with you in just a moment. I sat in the waiting room, fidgeting with the strap of my bag. The door opened, and Dr. Hansen stepped out. Emily, come on in, she said, her voice calm and welcoming. I followed her into her office, settling into the now familiar armchair. Dr. Hansen sat across from me, notepad in hand. How have you been since our last session, Emily? I took a deep breath. It's been okay. We finished moving into the new place. Dr. Hansen nodded encouragingly. That's a big step. How do you feel about it? It's different, I said, picking at a loose thread on my jeans. Smaller, but it feels like a fresh start, you know? That's good, Dr. Hansen said. And how have you been handling the public attention? I felt my shoulders tense. It's hard. People look at me differently now, like they're trying to figure out if I'm okay or if I'm broken. Dr. Hansen leaned forward slightly. And how do you see yourself, Emily? The question caught me off guard. I sat in silence for a moment, really thinking about it. I'm not sure. Sometimes I feel strong, like I survived something terrible and I'm still here. Other times. Other times? Dr. Hansen prompted gently. Other times I feel like that scared girl again, trapped and helpless, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Hansen nodded, her expression understanding. That's perfectly normal, Emily. Healing isn't linear. You'll have good days and bad days. The important thing is to recognize your progress. We spent the rest of the session discussing coping mechanisms and strategies for dealing with public scrutiny. By the time I left, I felt a little lighter, a little more prepared to face the world. As I walked home, I thought about how much had changed. The trial, the move, the therapy. It was all part of this new life I was building. A life free from my mother's control and manipulation. I reached our apartment building and paused, looking up at the windows. Dad was probably inside, getting ready for our dinner with Dr. Patel. I took a deep breath, feeling a small spark of determination ignite within me. This was our new beginning. It wouldn't be easy, but we were going to make it work. Together. Hey everyone. If you found this story gripping and want to hear more crazy ones like this, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more jaw-dropping tales every week. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. If you have your own wild stories to share or ideas you'd like us to bring to life, drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear them. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching.